All right. Welcome to the second installment of the 2022-23 Social Justice Leadership Series. Today's SJLS is part of the Conscious Coffee Hour series, which is included in this year's Hispanic Heritage Month events. So again, my name is Dr. Hudson, and I have the privilege of serving as the director of this office. But one of the other unique things that I have here on campus is that I also serve as the co-chair for the TAMU All in Democracy Task Force, which aims to increase overall levels of democratic engagement here at TAMU. So we have a fantastic event today entitled Su Voto, Su Voz, the impact of Latino and youth votes. We have a panel of individuals representing a variety of political organizations who are engaged in increasing Gen Z's participation in the electoral process. And so I'm going to serve as a moderator of this event. It's a nonpartisan event. And so we're going to have to address some individual housekeeping information to begin with. So as we begin, Sol needs to remind everybody that the views expressed during this event are not necessarily endorsed or supported by Texas A&M International University, the Board of Regents, the Texas A&M University System, or by Sol. By policy, TAMU is required to remain neutral in all political activities. The use of TAMU facilities and property by candidates and political organizations does not necessarily imply or indicate support for any candidate or political party. So we're going to start off by introducing our panelists. So if you could let us know your name, your major, classification if you're a student, because we have students here as well. And if you're not a student, what organizations are you're representing? And all of them are representing different organizations. So please go ahead. Let's start off with Jennifer Ramos.
Hey everybody, my name is Jen Ramos. I currently serve as the political specialist for Jolt Action. We are a C4 organization focused on youth Latino civic engagement. And I am a super senior at TAMU.
Wonderful. And Jolt Action is located where?
So we're statewide.
Statewide, great.
Awesome. So hi everyone, my name is Mendoza. And actually, as a democracy fellow, we're trying to do a project. So I am actually one of the students here that actually has another partner. So I actually big jobs to live involved. I currently majoring in multidisciplinary studies, education, and traditional liberal arts. But with that being said, I am also part of the TAMU College STEM. So College Democrats. And most importantly, I also served under Student Government Association for more than 2 years, actually 3 years of being that. I started as a freshman, being politically involved, but I also started since my senior year in high school. So at the end of the day, feel free to ask me. Hi everybody, my name is my program. I'm the regional organizing director for SJLS. I am from the community. I'm from the White House, so I've been doing some community organizing locally, and I got the opportunity to be a regional organizer. We could have more than 30 organizers on the panel to registering voters, and I'm really excited to be here with everybody. Hi everyone, my name is Cecilia. Everybody knows me as Cecilia. I'm a senior here at TAMU. I'm majoring in political science and sociology. And super proudly representing Texas. I first started in Texas. I've been living between ever since then. Got my feet wet. I'm currently serving in Texas, and both Texas is our nonpartisan nonprofit dedicated to grassroots organizing. We're simply still in Texas space. I'm super excited to be talking with y'all. Y'all are probably including around actually with like the very Marxist yellow shirts that I usually see, especially with class rides and music. So yeah, super excited to chat with y'all today, and like I said, any questions that y'all ever have, happy to always have to do things. And I also just want to give a shout out to all the sororities that are here, because it's super awesome just to see
This is fantastic. And this is a continuation. We actually had this similar panel in 2020 election during COVID. So we had a similar panel talking about the youth impact and really trying to engage students, especially here in Laredo and at TAMU, around these issues. But I think as part of the Social Justice Leadership Series, it's important, like there's a little bit of educational aspect of it. So I want to turn our attention to briefly describe Gen Z, which is all of you in this audience, not me. Right, maybe not a couple of other folks here, but 1 in 10 eligible voters in the 2022 midterm election and the electorate are part of this new generation of Americans, Generation Z. Born after 1996, most members of this generation are not eligible to vote yet, and if they are, this is probably the first election they are voting. But the oldest amongst them are turning about 25 right now. And so roughly about 28 million Americans will have an opportunity to cast their ballots of Gen Z, just Gen Z alone. Your political clout will continue to grow steadily in the coming years as more and more of this cohort reaches voting age. So unlike millennials, who like myself, we came of age, really like adulthood in the Great Recession of 2008 to 2012. Your new generation has inherited a relatively strong economy, save for inflation this time around, with record low unemployment. That is not something that my generation around there had. Especially now, though, since COVID has happened, it's really upended the political, economic, social landscape. You all, as Gen Z, face countless uncertain futures here. There are already signs that you all are have been particularly hit by COVID. So your generation has been particularly hit by COVID, with more than half of Gen Zers reported that they or someone in their household had a lost a job or taken a pay and cut because of because of COVID. And that was significantly higher than the share of millennials, so those that were already stable in their careers, Gen Xers and baby boomers. And so we know that you all, especially your age and demographic groups, are working at a higher risk service industry, right? So working as servers, bartenders, things of that nature, working in retail, much more at a higher rate than those my age, right? So aside from these, these kind of unique challenges with COVID, et cetera, we begin to see your cohort be different than previous generations. And I think that's super unique. And we're going to address this with the panel as we move through here. But in your ways, you are similar in some ways to my generation, the millennials, but different, right? Members of Gen Z are more racially and ethnically diverse than any other generation in the history of the United States, right? And they are on track to also be the most well-educated generation in history. So not only you're the most diverse, you're the most educated. And when you put those two things together, it tends to be you're more educated around social issues, right? When we look at your views on key social and policy issues, you look very similar to millennials, right? So Pew Research Survey conducted surveys in fall of 2018. People that were 13 and older are, so Gen Z, are progressive, pro-government. They see the country's growing racial and ethnic diversity as a good thing, and they're less likely than older generations to see the United States as superior to other nations. But, so we got this new generation of all these folks ready to vote, and then we have younger voters historically not turning out at high levels, right? So that's what we're trying to address today, right? The youth vote, which is those from 18 to 29, although some say it's different, had a turnout rate of just 50% in 2016. But in the 2020 election, we saw universities and colleges have turnout at 66%. Including TAMU. Of those that were registered here at TAMU, registered voters at TAMU turned out about the 66% rate, matching what it was nationwide. However, of all voting age population here at TAMU, we only had 53% turnout. Yes, it's high, but it could be higher overall. We also know that in 2018, our turnout rate, which was the last midterm election and the last time we had a gubernatorial election, our turnout rate for TAMU was only 41%. So you all, right, as Gen Z, have a pretty large challenge ahead of you. We know that people across the board, and students, both Asian, African American, Latino, and Indigenous folks are having a larger sway in some of the more important races around the nation. So if you pay a little attention to politics like I do, political junkie, you know that there's important Senate races this fall, right? Not here in Texas, but there's some important Senate races happening in perhaps Georgia. Well, not just perhaps Georgia, but in Georgia, there's a very important Senate race there. There's important Senate races in Florida, in Pennsylvania, and Ohio, to name a few, including Nevada. And these ones are going to determine the control of the United States Senate. We also know that all 435 seats in the United States House of Representatives are also up for election. And we noticed that this, the Center for, and I apologize here, the Center for, so Tufts University Center for Information and Research of Civic Learning and Engagement Circle, they did a survey here in 2022, and they figured what are the places that students and Latinos and young folk will have the most, the power to really impact the midterm election. And they said Arizona and Nevada both have a governor and a Senate race that are going to be highly impacted by your youth vote and the Latino vote, right? Arizona, though, has high rates of young voter registration, but also they don't turn out in Nevada. So it's super interesting. In Arizona, they turn out, but in Nevada, they've registered, but they don't actually turn out. So what's the difference here? So anyway, we're going to move here to the panel, but I want to provide some of this context of people are doing the studies across the board because youth participation has gone up, but as has millennials and Gen X and baby boomers, right? Their participation has also gone up. So while you all may be voting at higher rates than you've ever voted before, these other groups are also voting at higher rates, right? So what we're going to do today is we're going to do a panel. They don't even know the questions, but it's going to be more about from their perspective and their organization. So we're going to start off and kind of move round robin here. So we're going to move with Jen, then we're going to go to Adis, Ilse, and then Ceci, and then the next question will go to Adis, et cetera, et cetera. Does that make sense? So my question for this first issue, which is the political participation, how engaged have you seen Gen Z this election?
Well, I will say this. Historically speaking, the political parties in Texas have not provided as much effort to recruit young people. And so what we're seeing, especially when you look at the Texas House of Representatives or the state Senate, or even some of the elected offices, the average age for those elected offices in the state Senate is 65, and in the House of Representatives is 58. And so with that in mind, there is no real connect between what Texas looks like and who serves in that office. That being said, young people, in particular Gen Z and millennials, are starting to really pay attention to what's going on. They've never known a world without student loan debt. They've never known a world without being at war. And especially now, highlighted by the COVID-19 pandemic, there is a sudden push for change. And even so, we're seeing this in the gun advocacy movement to change for gun legislation. So Gen Z has been mobilized by this perfect storm of so many political issues that now, rather than waiting to be invited to be at the table, they're saying, we're just going to bring up a chair and you're going to have to deal with us. As a result of that, we're seeing some of the partisanship completely change as a result of Gen Z and millennials coming in. For example, in the State Democratic Executive Committee, which is a body that I serve on, we went from 8 people under the age of 60 serving on that body in 2016. Now, in 2022, 1 out of every 4 members on the State Democratic Executive Committee is under the age of 60 with a focus of under 40. That means young people are now starting to come asking questions, not only asking questions, but demanding answers and wanting to be a part of that systemic change.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jen. Adis, you're here on campus. How engaged are you seeing Gen Z, your fellow students, on this election?
Okay, so I'm gonna give y'all from my perspective as a student, not the democracy fellow. So one of the things that we are so quick to do as students and just in general is complain. And we post things on social media and pretty much just overall like, why isn't things doing, or like, why are things being done? My question to you is, what are you doing? we are so quick to go ahead and post something on social media because it's only as fast as putting one click, reshare it. Okay, but one of the things is show up to protest, make your own protest. Pretty much overall, go and like leave your small like hometown, because I had the opportunity of going to Argentina and studying social justice issues. And let me tell you something, we think we have it bad, other people have it even worse in third world countries. So one of the things when it comes to that youth involvement is we're so quick to like, yes, I'm gonna grab a chair and sit at the table, but what work are you doing? What work are you actually getting people to come and get involved? I serve under my sorority, which is a bunch of 35 girls, and call me crazy, but I'll be that one girl that'd be like, y'all gotta go vote. Y'all gotta go ahead and share this. Y'all gotta do this. But at the same time, it only takes one person. And I guess from my perspective is you need to be that one person.
Thank you. Ilse, how about you? You've been out not just here in Laredo, but all throughout South Texas with Next Gen. How are you seeing the Gen Z engaged in this election?
I think at this point, we're seeing more of a turnout. We're seeing more young people coming up and getting registered to vote. I manage what's called the Frontera, which we coined at NextGen, all the way from El Paso to Brownsville. And we're making sure that Texas is invested in. This is the first time that NextGen is here in Texas, so we're working with coalitions. At the end of the day, it's respecting the spaces and the organizations that have been investing for many, many years to mobilize young people, and then making sure that we're adding to that by energizing these young folks and making sure that we are in the sites that you all need us to be, that we're in campus, that we're at community centers, that you all are also activated with some of the actions that we're doing. The more that we engage, the more that we build a coalition, and the more that we communicate with folks on what the values are. That's why we have Pledge to Vote. We survey folks to make sure that we're meeting the needs, and it's not just what the organizations are telling you or why you should turn out to vote, but what young people are really looking at.
Thank you. Ceci, so you're here on campus. I see you out there registering voters with Move Texas. Tammy Yu has had this is now, I believe, the second full year of the Move Texas partnership. We're actually, NextGen is also a partner. We have a memorandum of understanding with NextGen, but we've had one a little bit longer with Move Texas. Move Texas has been mobilizing folks across the state. In fact, today in the Texas Tribune, NextGen is working, or not NextGen, excuse me, Move Texas is working with college students at Texas A&M University, because they're in Brazos County, their commissioners removed the on-campus early voting location from a school that has 70,000 students. They cannot vote early. We get 4 days at Tammy U, right? That's awesome. But there are people there, 70,000 people now have to take 30 minutes out of their way to go vote early at City Hall, right? That's kind of crazy. But we see Move Texas all around here. They were just quoted today in the Texas Tribune. How are you seeing Gen Z being engaged in this election?
So from 2018 to 2020, or getting to 2018, we saw a huge surge of students who were really excited to vote, really excited to engage with us. And then when 2020 happened, I think the pandemic really put somewhat of a stop to that, not so much in that students weren't eager to engage, rather there was more of a sense of disillusion. And so now 2022, I see that students are still as eager to engage. However, we have a little bit of two sides. So I see like one side where we have students that are like, how can I volunteer? How can I register? When is the next election? Or let me know what's going on. We have awesome SJLS events where we have students who are super eager to engage. And on the other end, we have students who are disillusioned, who don't believe in the voting system, and because it's very much because of the fact that these systems weren't built for us. And so to those students and to any of y'all who have friends, family who tell you, well, my vote doesn't matter, or I'm not gonna vote because I don't like who's on the ballot. To them, I say that's not by coincidence. In fact, it's by design. It's a symptom of voter suppression, right? And so growing up in a border community, we hear, especially coming from like immigrants and things like that. I'm a daughter of immigrants, I'm a wife of an immigrant. And so it's hard to navigate systems that no one taught you how to navigate. And then on top of that, that no one built for you, right? And so this idea of we're super big on mental health and slacktivism and all these awesome things. So this idea of intergenerational trauma also applies to things like civic engagement and democracy, because we have intergenerational trauma with not being able to access these political systems. We have, unfortunately, a lot of students in a couple of different organizations, including SJLS, where we're trying to get them to become VDRs, and elections is making them wait, even locally, making them wait at least 2 hours, or telling them you need to give us a courtesy call, when all of those things are just more and more barriers to that voter suppression. And so I think Gen Z is very eager and excited and has the power to be able to engage and make those changes. And whenever that moment of, I don't want to do this anymore, or this is exhausting, or why is elections making things so hard for me? To that, I say lean on your friends, lean on your community, because that's the way voter suppression works. And that's what they want us to do. So keep pushing your friends and keep leaning on community.
It's like kind of like you read my mind as it related to the questions, because I think that's exactly kind of this disillusionment. And I really want to hone in on this idea of disillusionment with some of the folks, and the system's not being set up in place for that, right? I mean, becoming involved in politics can, one, be difficult and scary. I mean, how many of you talked about politics at home, right, growing up? Not many folks, if at all. If you did, it was like one of those taboo topics. You're like, no, we're not talking about that or religion, right? Like, but down here in South Texas, that's probably different, right? But that's where I grew up. We don't talk about politics or religion. And so becoming involved in that, you don't wake up one day and become a political organizer is basically what I'm trying to do. And we often, even after you become politically aware, as most of you all, as college students become politically aware, you don't know how to actually become engaged in the system. So my next question is, how did you become engaged in the system? Briefly, but then we're going to take a break to do some food, right? So, Elizabeth, how did you become involved in the complex political system?
Okay, so I've always wanted to be a teacher. And let's start off with the salary. Let's talk salary teacher base, right? Let's talk about the fact that children are getting murdered in schools. Let's talk about the fact that teachers work from 7 a.m. to 4 p.m. At the end of the day, 50,000 compared to, let's just say, a dentist who looks at your mouth to 75, 80,000. I understand they're both great professions, but that's where my thing started as an educator, as a teacher. Because at the end of the day, you will never know if you're ever going to see me again next time. So going back into that, I've always had that persona of like, I want to be loud, but I had no intention or purpose. Then I found my purpose when I came to college. I'm a first generation Latina student, single mom. So pretty much growing up in the Medicaid and the housing and all of those perspectives where you're under the government, I told myself, I don't want to depend on the government. I want to do more. I want to work. And that is where I decided, like, you know what? If my mom was able to do it by herself and she does not vote, let me get her to vote, because at the end of the day, she is an immigrant. She became a citizen 22 years ago. She is part of this United States of America that we call. So that is how I was able. I got involved meeting one of my great mentors, Dr. Hudson. I became involved just asking people like, hey, like, how's it going? And at the end of the day, you just have to be able to lose that fear of like, you know what, like nothing's going to be able to stop you. And once you have a purpose in life, think about it, like, why are y'all getting y'all's degree? What is it that's affecting you? What is it that is not only affecting you, but your family? What is going to affect your kids in the future? What is not only going to affect your kids, but what is going to affect your grandkids? Right now, let's talk about the earth. It's coming down. Look at Puerto Rico. Look at Mexico. Those are the conversations that we're not talking about. Why? Because we're blinded at the fact that we have technology, we have money, we have riches in the earth, but one of the things that you have to encounter is that your voice is your only rich that you have right now.
That's it.
This is my, I guess what we do in organizing is my personal story, time. So, I started, as an adoptee organizer, with, a local organization here doing immigration work, with DACA applications, helping folks how to fill out DACA applications. I'm a DACA recipient, so, a lot of the things that mobilize me to be a part of this work is the fact that I'm a DACA recipient, I'm an immigrant. My family, came to the States, for, healthcare access. And, I don't have the opportunity to vote. So the other point of it is how can I engage with people and make sure that we have representation that's gonna help all our communities? And that is why I started, at the bottom as a community organizer, just talking to folks. And then from there went into a couple of, political organizations. I even did a school board race in, Arlington, Virginia, which was really fun. So it's very energizing to see, Next Gen make this huge investment. I looked for an organization that was gonna align with my values and the kind of, individual that I am. And, I follow Jen on Facebook, so you want to follow some of the folks that are the mobilizers of our generation. I'm a millennial, by the way. But yeah, the more that you get involved, the more that you learn, you educate, yourself and other folks, you come to find that, a lot of our values align, a lot of our missions align. And that's why we do all this great work.
Thank you.
Awesome. So I love this question. I used to hate this question because I was always like, I don't know. I just always cared, right? And I think a lot of people feel the same way, where it's like, I care. Now what, right? So we know voting, and we know that that's one step, right? And so for me, it was always like, well, how can I go from not just voting, but also like feeling like I'm actively doing this every day? And so when people ask me like, when did you get started? I think back to high school when I was like running around in like little skirts and hairy legs, just trying to push this idea of like, don't police my body. And then I think to like elementary school, reading about like, oh my God, what is feminism? And like reading AR books and things like that. And then I just think, so y'all will often hear this word organizing. It's just a fancy word to say that you mobilize your community. And so for a long time, I didn't really like that word. Because to me, it's like I am the oldest daughter in my family, and as many of y'all know, I see a lot of women in here. Being the oldest daughter in your family means that you're naturally born to be an organizer, right? And so for me, I was already organizing when I was asking my teachers or my little brother's teachers about their homework, when I was helping my parents navigate English, helping my parents. We first went to San Antonio, then moved to Laredo. So we don't have any family here, helping them just figure out what is Laredo like, right? And so when asked how I first got involved, I think it started just by being the oldest daughter of immigrants. And then after that, finally moved to Texas. I was lost for a while. I was at LC. Randomly, this man comes into my class, does a class rap. And boom, there it was. Like, this is how I can get involved. And if you are interested in getting involved and being an organizer and helping build community, you can do that with us. You can do that with Next Gen, with Jolt, on campus, with PAC. There's so many different opportunities, but just don't be afraid to take that first step. And if you stumble and you fall, trip over your words, that's great, because it will help you as you move forward through your organizing journey and through just building more community.
Great. Good.
So my story starts a little earlier. I got involved when, and mind you, I'm a product of public schools, born and raised in Laredo. And in the second grade, we were studying the Electoral College. And I went home and asked my mom, I was like, hey, Mom, who are you voting for? We're learning about this cool thing in government, and I'm really excited. And she's like, I don't know, because I've never voted in my life. And mind you, I grew up less than a mile away from the border, grew up in the Azteca, part of the hood, in case y'all are not familiar with Laredo. And nobody talked about voting. Nobody had ever been a part of voting. And so my thing was, at 9 years old, if my mom is the smartest person I know, and she's never voted, why? And that just started me digging and asking questions like, well, why don't you vote? And have you thought about voting? And, you know, kind of getting in these chattering stuff. My mom thought it was a phase, like Harry Potter. Neither one of them was a phase. And I had always just kind of stayed interested in politics and government. Then in 2014, when I was a student at TAMU, the first time around, I was a freshman at TAMU, I watched Wendy Davis, who was a senator at the time, do a filibuster at the Capitol and saw thousands of people who were protesting and talking about the ability for a person to make a choice about what happens with their bodies. And being in Laredo, watching that in my kitchen, and that happening in Austin, I was like, okay, this is real. This is happening here in Texas of all places. Because in Laredo, you don't really talk about voting. You kind of hear about it and you know somebody who knows somebody but don't really know about it. And so that was the year I decided, okay, let's get involved. So we started the TAMU College Democrats that year. It was really hard because we couldn't get any meetings. We couldn't do anything. You know, it was like, well, we don't have young Republicans. I was like, well, that's their problem. And so we tried really hard to get things off the ground, kind of really started focusing on all of that. And then I also started talking to my county party at the time, which is Webb County. And they said, well, you're too young. You got to sit down and wait your turn. It's not your time. And internally, and I apologize if this is going to come off a little crass, I said to hell with that. And still continued to get involved, became a volunteer deputy registrar to register voters, started really having these conversations, and kind of hit this impasse of like, it's not happening. There's nobody who's really paying attention at the time, but I know that there's something out there. And around this time, things got really hard for me to where I had to drop out of TAMU. And then maybe a couple years later, after working full-time, was a server, bartender, was just really angry, disillusioned, and disenfranchised. I'm like, this is my life, and what became of it? So I decided to move to Austin because also, for those of you who don't know, I'm a sister of Sigma Delta Lambda. Some sisters at our beta chapter, which is at UT, said, hey, you should come visit us for a couple weeks. Let's, you know, get to see us, get to see what's going on. Went to Austin, loved it, saved everything I had, and in 3 months moved from Laredo to Austin. And even as just a bartender and a server who was a college dropout, I was told, hey, you can get involved. You got to figure out where your strengths are. And that was the first time that I had been told that my voice made a difference, that my perspective made a difference, that my personal story and my life made a difference, even as a college dropout. So I got involved in a local race there. That local race turned into 3. Then that turned from me working as an organizer, talking to voters, knocking on doors at night while I was waiting tables during the day, then turned into me managing a campaign at night and waiting tables in the day, then bartending on 6th Street, and then traveling across the state to meet with other young people who also had questions and were told by their county parties to sit down and wait their turn. And so eventually, over years of just saying I refuse to be put in this box of I'm not educated enough or I'm not involved enough, saying it's time that we do better than that. So now, several years later, I'm here and got to the opportunity to work with Jolt because they said, you know, it's not about your degree just yet. We'll help you get there, but it's about the experience that you have. At this point, I'm 10 years in, over 100 campaigns, including 3 statewide ones. I think in 2016, I was the youngest campaign manager and the only Latina managing a campaign in Austin at that point in time. And it was hard. It was really hard to be the only one in that space, but to know that if there was somebody like me who did not have the family, who had the introductions or the opportunities to do it, and I could make it, then there are going to be hundreds of other people out there who have that exact same experience, who have that exact wanting to do better for their families, to have food on the table, to have education, to be sure that they go to safe public schools, to know that their drinking water is going to be safe. These very basic things were what kept me going in hopes that you bring other people with you. So now, thanks to the work that we do at Jolt to mobilize and empower young Latinos, I am back at TAMU to finish that degree that I didn't get to finish 10 years ago, but also am focused on mobilizing a generation that has been told to sit down and wait their turn, to tell them, no, you're going to bring a chair and we're going to talk about it and we're going to tell you how to change the world.
Thanks. So I love panels like this because you hear people's stories, and we don't get this every day talking about the way we're being involved in the systems, right? And we also don't hear from a panel made up of completely of women, right? Oftentimes it's men that like to take the spaces in this, and it was intentional of creating a panel completely of women and their experiences in this field, because oftentimes they are not centralized, right? So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take about a little 5-minute break. There's food, there are paninis, roba vieja, there's dessert. It is Taste of Cuba as part of Hispanic Heritage Month. We'll come back here in about 5 minutes with this as well.
She's a little well planned, so that.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how it's going. I don't know.
Yep.
But I've already.
Yeah.
Not normal potatoes, friends.
I know, water. Keeping us dehydrated, Hudson.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to think of. I'm sure you know, like,
Figured it would be the only I apologize in advance. Because I'm just thinking, I'm like,
No, I mean, yeah, that's figured doing and I was like, I could think like more people invested in like, green index, like, oh yeah, take your pictures. It's such a small world of organizing that this is true.
yeah, I know, like I took it upstairs, but I didn't know, so I spent more time in that looking for I had more time to make it. Let's take it, resources, Dario needs the help, so let's come down here and let's get it done. Yeah, really. I'm totally down.
I've been working with RGB and they're gonna do like a series. Middle of it. So I'm trying to kind of.
Okay.
And say that Napoleon Dynamite. So, maybe we could do like a three-way, like, just for voter registration and.
No, that would be great.
I'm not sure. I think that's something. So, for the 11th. So that was one. We were just talking about how the elections.
Yeah, if you can say something about that, because, okay, so first of all, my law, it's not supposed to be till 4. It's supposed to be taken over next morning, you're supposed to have your.
I was talking, it was like,
Yeah.
same way, like the
Bylaw.
5 days, right?
So by law, it's the 5 days, but depending on the election officer, they're not supposed to post it.
Or until the 7th. Yeah, I was like,
They have an elections administrator, that's also the. Oh, no, right, it's terrible.
well, I don't know if it's it, but the new one.
Yeah, it's saying so, they're only taking until 5 o'clock on the voter registration deadline for Webb County. And that's not the way it's supposed to be. You have to have 5 days up until, like 5 days afterwards to turn them into your elections office.
For the CDR.
For BDR cards, yeah. I mean, if it's somebody who's sending in by mail, it has to be postmarked by that day, but otherwise.
I can tell you that.
I called
Say Luis says, and what did he say? What did
They
he say?
said that it would be until 5.
That is not
That's what they told me.
That's,
Well, no one's going to challenge that.
well, let me start sending some letters and getting, actually, do I need to call Bethel for that one? Cause I can.
Not at the moment. Because I value having a voter on campus.
Well, let's talk about it. We'll organize on that, but also here's another cheat sheet for all. Travis County offers their BDR online.
Oh, really?
Yes, we hired someone do that, and this is your reciprocal.
No idea what.
That is by law.
And that's what we said.
So that's how I had my first PDR, was actually through Travis, and then I just reciprocated. They also didn't know, and just say, it's supposed to do this, I don't have to do anything.
Exactly.
And I push back, all you have to do is push back.
Yeah, and they're not used to people back.
But should be not.
All right, so friends, I'm super glad that
If
we
y'all
are.
need to come down here and do it, I will come down here.
I just don't know.
Super glad that we are engaged in conversation, and as we talk a little bit about this, we're talking
I think I'll just have to ACLU.
a little bit about the VDR, volunteer deputy registrar. All right, we're gonna go back to the panel now.
right.
So while we're here, we're gonna move kind of back into this. So this next question goes to Ilse, goes back into this disillusionment, right? Because I really want to, we often hear folks say over and over, Gen Z's not engaged, Gen Z or youth aren't engaged. When I think back to when I was a youth, I'm like, I was really engaged. My peers were really engaged. They knew what was going on. And I look back to even 2018, 2020, 2022 here, since I've been in Laredo, youth have been pretty engaged, at least knowledgeable. But whether they're engaged externally in kind of movement-based things, we're noticing that I've noticed a trend that we're seeing more nonpartisan engagement than there is partisan engagement. And so my question is, just as someone, and this goes to everybody, you'll all ask this, is why are we seeing students and youth, why is it that you think that we're seeing students and youth not engage in partisan politics and more non-partisan politics?
Folks are afraid of the label, being labeled to right or to left. And I just want to share some statistics that I actually brought with me from NextGen. So we have a universe of 2.6 million young people, with 36% identifying as Hispanic. From our poll in March 1st for the primary, young people turned out 24 points higher overall in the primary, and that's a rate of 30.1 that turned out in the 35 and up group age. So yeah, I think for the most part, we're seeing that people are engaged but don't want, feel that everything is too politicized at some point. And that's where I see kind of the trends of engagement with us. I think we have more success, to be honest, in these past few weeks that we've been doing voter registration in the high schools, where we're starting to engage with young voters, as opposed to Tammy, you, and I think Ceci can agree with it, like, we're out here sometimes 5-6 hours, and we're not seeing the response that we would like to see. And that goes back to, like, a lot of folks are very hesitant to engage with us if they think that we might be too progressive or too far right.
That's such an interesting, and I'm not trying to cut you off here. That's such an interesting thing. I think it's actually the opposite. And we have a high voter registration rate already on campus, right? We are 81%, this is 2020 election data, 81% of all TAMU students are registered to vote. Your slice of the pie is small. Unlike at high schools, where the slice of the pie is unlimited apparently, because the other day, you all, I think you were part of this group that went to United and registered 600 plus students at United High School. That's one, insane, because I'm like, wait a second, how big is that high school that there's already over 600
1,400
seniors?
seniors.
So already 600 of them were eligible. That in and of itself is craziness, right? So I think the slice of pie is going to be bigger. And because you're doing such a great job, both NextGen and Move Texas, of already doing it in the high schools, when they come to TAMU, they ain't got nothing else to do. So I kind of think it's a blessing and a curse, right? Because I don't mean to look at it that way. But it's like, hey, that's good on my end, right?
Yeah, pretty much agreement on that part. And as far as like disillusionment, I think it comes a lot from just this idea that, or people being disillusioned with partisan politics is more because we see all these like dusty, musty, crusty partisan politicians who are taking money. And we see this on either side, right? Taking money from a bunch of big corporations that ultimately don't represent us. And so Gen Z as a generation, we're not interested. You could be blue, you could be red, you could be purple, you could be pink. It doesn't matter. Are you, at the end of the day, what are you doing? What are you actively engaging with? How are you listening to us? And reciprocating what we're interested in seeing in politics, right? And so I think it's been super awesome to work with Move, especially in a nonpartisan way, because a big problem here in Laredo that we just touched on, it's not so much the part of getting people to register to vote. It's more building the trust in our community and making sure that people are willing to engage with us and willing to listen, and just like willing to see us as a resource rather than just this scary big organization that's trying to tell them like this is who you vote for, or this is the politician that you should agree with. And we see that a lot because of this whole patron system that we have. Jen was talking about this earlier, where you know, we all know a friend of a friend who knows the politician and is telling you, and you're gonna put this sign up in your house. Sometimes I think it's insane because we'll see these houses. I live in District 1, and so I'll see a house and it has like all 4 candidates in the same house. And so that's a reflection of how older generations maybe align more with partisan politics, and they'll tell you vote blue, vote red. And with Gen Z, it's not about blue or red, it's about putting your money where your mouth is, and putting your actions more importantly. So as a generation, I think we are not interested because we've already seen how these systems have not worked for us, and we're ready to make them work.
Fantastic. Those are great segues into kind of, I think, Jen's story as well. When you talk about a little bit about like partisan politics, like you are engaged in partisan politics at a very high level. And so, but you also created a partisan organization here at TAMU. Talk a little bit about that, what that was like, and like why we may be seeing this other generation, right? Because you're millennial.
Yeah.
Why are we seeing the distance, if there is distance?
Yeah.
In your opinion, yeah.
So let's start with TAMU. Let's go back to flashback in 2014 when I started the TAMU College Democrats with a group of other young organizers. First and foremost, we were not allowed to meet anywhere because TAMU's rules did not have any kind of confines and ability to allow partisan organizations to organize. The only thing that we had knowledge to work with was there is a space for free speech on campus that is mandated by state law. And that is a circle, patch of grass, in front of the fountain, in front of the library. That's your free speech zone. That's the only place that you can use because there were no rules that existed at the time for the organization. We couldn't do voter registration because that was inherently partisan and that did not allow for any confines or constraints to do anything. We couldn't actively table or recruit at Dusty Camp or in the Breezeway. I mean, we didn't even have a Breezeway back then. You know, it was hard to do any of that stuff because the university did not, it was a radical idea that students would want to be civically engaged. Like, how dare you want to participate? We had one polling location, and that was the business center. That was it. And that was the TAMU, you know, kind of dusting themselves off and saying, that's it. I am thankful that things have changed. Now there's open discussion. Now Student Affairs, or at the time it was Office of Student Affairs, now it's Seoul, has opened the ability to register voters in a nonpartisan capacity, but that also goes to Gen Z. Gen Z knows what they want. They know exactly what they want. They refuse to settle for less, and that's not a bad thing. We're seeing Gen Z at a high level asking for better working conditions. Like, honestly, Gen Z, thank you. Y'all raised the minimum wage for asking for $15 an hour because you refuse to settle for less, working through the pandemic and doing all of these things. Y'all are asking for student debt relief. So President Biden would not have made any changes if it were not for the young voters that made that decision. It was not out of the kindness of his heart. I assure you it was not. But when we think about Latinos and young people and where they fit into this and why Gen Z might go the nonpartisan route in comparison to the partisan route. And I'll tell you all, I've been doing partisan politics for over a decade. It is exhausting. It is very draining some days because there are some times where you walk into the room and you're the only person who's not eligible for AARP. And I don't mean that in a mean way. I just say like it's hard to be the only person who understands your issues, who knows what it is to make the decision between taking out a loan to go to school full time or working twice as hard to maybe go part time. Or, these are real life decisions, or even thinking about public school, going to high school. When is the last time that a school board member went to high school in comparison to you? You kind of think of those lived perspectives and lived experiences, and Gen Z thinks of it from a different perspective. I mean, there are so many articles of how Gen Z and millennials have killed X, Y, and Z industry, how they killed chain restaurants, how they killed, textbooks in college. There are so many excuses because Gen Z knows what they want and refuses to settle for one box or another. Now, to support that, the Texas Organizing Project, which is a statewide organization that focuses on civic engagement, did a research study on Latino voters in Texas. And what they found was that Latinos in general do not have a tie to partisan ideology in the same way that African Americans and Asians do, but because the culture is so diverse. You have Mexican immigrants, first-gen students coming in from across the border. Even now, students who live in Laredo who come to school at TAMU and return that cycle over and over again. You have Cubans who are fleeing persecution from a communist government. You have Puerto Ricans who have lived in this big limbo of not having statehood or even being recognized as an independent island. You have Dominicans and Central Americans fleeing for political asylum. These cultures and differences have resulted in a lack of political ideology in comparison to our African American counterparts who are very tied to civil rights, or Asian Americans who are tied with internment and forced detainment during World War II, who might be involved in civic engagement. And as a result of that, because this ideology has not been fleshed out, we don't have a tie to partisan ideology, we're not going to seek out partisan organizations, honestly. I mean, raise your hand if you know who your precinct chair is. This panel doesn't count. Y'all don't, exactly. Like, partisan politics is very nerdy, it's very wonky, and it's designed that way to keep people out. But this is all the more reason why you should be looking to see who represents you and how to get in.
Thank you. Arizbeth.
I think she hit the point when she said that it's very nerdy and all of that perspective. Looking at the words politics, there's too much wording into that perspective. And I feel that's where it's like people don't want to get involved as it is already when they just hear the word politics. So having that differentiation of partisan and not partisan, that's when you're able to really understand, like, you know what? Let's look into it this perspective. The partisan way was under white people. It was built for white people. The nonpartisan way is how she mentioned, we have cultures, we have different ideologies, we have people that identify as who they want to identify. And these are the things that you cannot just, settle to one thing. You have other different things where you fit in that you cannot just specifically be entitled to just either one or two or three. You have many other things that you have to be able. And that's where I feel like Gen Z is able to come into the understanding that I'm not just one person that fits into your role. I'm a person that has many other roles, but I have to understand myself first before I serve you.
I like that. I think that kind of leads into this next thing that I'm really interested in. I mean, we're seeing record voter registration rates in the city of Laredo. I mean, hands down, city of Laredo, we now have 141,000 voters on the voter rolls as of last week, Tuesday. That's a lot for the city of Laredo. But our turnout rate is abysmal. We're talking like the highest rate that we've ever had is 50%, and that was in 2020. Mm-hmm. And then, like, what is the difference between people doing this nonpartisan voter registration and then taking the next step? Where's that disconnect? And we're going to limit it because we're almost at our time, but we're going to limit it to like about a minute for the response because I have one final question after that for everybody, okay? So where's the disconnect between I'm willing to do the voter registration, but I'm not willing to show up at the polls? That's it, go ahead.
So I say the disconnect in that room, a big thing that we believe in is there's no political apathy. Young people are not apathetic to politics. Young people don't vote because voting is not accessible. And so even with having a campus polling location, oftentimes I run into students who don't know what's the difference between something like early voting and voting on election day, What if I wait until election day? Where's my precinct location? What is a precinct location, right? We throw all these big words around. And so a big part of MOVE's mission is to not only register y'all to vote, but to make sure that y'all actually polls, mobilizing y'all, right? The mobilize, organize, vote, empower portion of our work is making sure that we make that connection. And so from MOVE's perspective, that disconnect is not so much because people are not interested. And we can see that through the fact that people are registering to vote. In the last election, we had about 130,000 people who were registered. So just this year, we've gotten 10,000 more people who registered to vote. People registered to vote. Oftentimes, I'll tell them, hey, it's less than 2 minutes. Okay, never mind, I'll go and I'll register to vote with you, right? And so it's not so much that people don't care, it's that these things are not accessible. And even when you get registered to vote, okay, I know voting's important, I registered to vote, now what? I don't know what a precinct is, I don't know who my city council member is, I don't agree with any of the rural candidates. What am I supposed to do then? And so I think that disconnect comes one, of course, from our disillusionment with politics, voter suppression tactics, and just with not seeing candidates who reflect our values.
Thank you. And I think you're hitting it right on the dot. And I think this is why this conversation is great. We're gonna go Jen, but again, briefly, if we could.
Yeah, sure. So I think definitely following up, education is a key component. A lot of candidates say, hey, vote for me, vote for this, but what do you stand for? What are you doing? What makes you different? Why should I elect you over somebody else? I think that part of the thing that's missing is the way that Laredo politics is set up is it's set up to favor a certain marginal amount of people that will make the decisions without regard for anybody else. That system doesn't work anymore, especially in the city of Laredo. We have a younger generation of people that want change that are going to ask for that change. And now it's terrifying to these people who have always been in power, who always have this system defending their old ways. So I think the best thing we can do is show up and ask questions because they're not expecting you to ask any questions.
I think that's absolutely true. Trust me, as one of those young people in those rooms, they don't expect us to ask those questions and be a troublemaker. Beth.
I think it's a process of continuous learning, and I feel like a lot of the times people get tired when you think it's too maturity, and I feel like that's where that disconnect is. Like I'm not saying you're not, but people are not willing to actually continue to keep up with what's going on. If it doesn't affect you, then you don't care. And I think that's where like that disconnect is. Like you should be able to care because at the end of the day, it might not affecting you, but it's affecting your sister. It's affecting your sister who is becoming or in the transition of being a transgender person. Or these are the little things that we do not think about because you know what? Oh, it doesn't bother me. And I feel like that disconnect is like, no, it's bothering you one way or another. It can bother you in your human rights. It can bother you in your economy. It can bother you in any kind of perspective you want to go ahead and put it in. But I feel like that's the disconnection. Like if you feel like it doesn't bother you, then you don't care.
And I think, yes. I think sometimes we're also, just as general and humans, we're short-sighted, right? What's in the immediacy of right now? And I think sometimes we don't think, what's going to affect me 5, 10, 15 years from now? So Ilse, final thought, what do you think with this last question here? Yeah.
Like everybody else, I agree that education is one of the primary things, but also we live in a community that's a high poverty rate community. A lot of people depend on their jobs, so we don't have a National Voter Registration Day as a holiday. We don't have, we don't have the access sometimes. A lot of folks work 7 to 7, long hours, second jobs, and in the economy that we have right now, I think that that's one of the factors that affects a lot of folks. But this is why we have organizations like MOVE, like Joel, like NextGen. We're here providing a service in the community, making sure that we're here to give the information about the polling sites, access to getting registered, so that there's a step forward into having more people turn out.
Yes, and I think one of the great things that we are seeing here in the city of Laredo to kind of combat that misinformation and or allow for students, and we're specifically talking about students here today, like if you work a job but you only have like 10 minutes to be able to vote on election day, every single location, including the space here on campus, will be able, you can vote. So you don't have to worry about what precinct am I in. anywhere in the city of Laredo that has a place to vote, you can now vote this election for the first time ever, which is amazing that we were able to get this from the Secretary of State. My final question as we close up here, and I know it's 5:30. Last thing is, what is the number one issue that you think affects that the youth will be voting on this fall? Number one thing that you think the youth are voting on this fall. And so we're going to go briefly across this way again. Last question. So right here. Yep.
Okay.
Jen, yep.
I think reproductive choice is going to be a big one this cycle. What we're seeing is young people, and specifically women and femme identifying people, are coming out to vote because they took away our rights.
Great. Anizbeth?
For me, it's more of a bigger problem. It's the inflation of what's going on. The cost of milk is higher than the cost of gas too, and even the cost of gas is also equal as amount, same thing as milk. You're gonna have to choose whether you're gonna choose to feed your kids or you have to take your kids to school. And not only that, but I also feel that there's more to that, the education perspective. The Board of Education is actually getting targeted with the Broward's Board of Education when it comes to actually having public education for free. If you did not think about that, make sure you look into that. That's getting affected for students not getting free public education anymore. And not only that, but gun issues.
Great. So that's good three issues. Good things. Good three issues. Yes.
So we've seen, we have our pledge to votes where we have folks survey what issues matter. I've seen a lot of people focused on student debt. I've seen a lot of people focused on reproductive rights, and I think those are going to be some of the major issues that we're going to that are going to turn out folks.
I would say for Laredo specifically, and Dr. Hunt, you just touched on this, we're short-sighted oftentimes when we're voting, and so we don't realize the effects of how city council could affect us, right, 5-10 years down the line. Ultimately, it was local city council members who allowed for the plant that's currently putting cancer in Laredo's air. They were the ones who allowed for that plant to come here, right? And so even though TikTok might have our attention span really short, super important to turn out for local elections. And on that point, I think that in Laredo specifically, a big thing that's going to mobilize people is climate justice, making sure that there's no cancer in our air, we have clean water. We just finished with like chlorine being all over our water. I went to Starbucks, got a cold brew, and it tasted terrible because the chlorine in the water, right? And so for Laredo specifically, but I think Texas as a whole too, we'll be seeing a lot of voters come out for climate justice.
I agree with the climate justice, and I actually think, just to finalize this off, I think more and more people are actually going to be coming to turn out for the local election, which then will impact the statewide and gubernatorial, because I don't know about you, but I'm tired of the same old politicians in Laredo that give me boil water notices over and over again, right? These same old politicians who are short-sighted, who thought no way, shape, or form about infrastructure, right? The fact that we are in Laredo and we have worse roads than I did growing up in Wisconsin, where we have snow and pothole. Why do I have worse roads in Laredo when we're not even using plows on the ground, right? Like, this does not make sense, right, friends? Nonetheless, let's give our panelists a round of applause. If you did not sign in, we will ask you that you please sign in, and then that will be it for today, okay? Make sure to grab some food, because the food will be here as well. I'm going to close this up, but I also have to go.
I do have an ask, if anybody would like to sign a pledge to vote, Jose has pledge to votes with him. That, like I said, is a survey, and it helps us bring resources to the community.